The Jacksonville Bullies brings you the second quarter of YourJax Fantasy Football, your newest professional sports team, bringing indoor lacrosse to the arena. Home opener September 15th. The opener is against Charlotte, and if you thought lacrosse out in the field was fast, you got to see this. Head to jaxbullies.com to buy your tickets. Mike Dempsey, TJ Stry here with you, and Mike, we did quarterbacks. They're throwing to the wide receivers. Wide receivers became very prolific in 2011, so there's a lot of them. Let's get right into it. The top five, and folks, for you to know, these are the rankings that your opponents are going to be looking at when they're drafting. These are not Mike and I's rankings. We're going to find the gems for you in these, but I think it's important for people to see what their opponents are going to be looking at. Your top 10 here is really top heavy with Calvin. And then you have this glut of people. Where do you go?
Well, obviously, Calvin's a guy you can consider anytime, I think, after the top three running backs come off the board. But for me, I go with A.J. Green in Cincinnati as the next guy. And the reason I like him over Julio Jones is there's nobody else in Cincinnati. They've got a glut of number 2, number 3, number 4 type wide receivers, and nobody is like Roddy White who will have to get his share.
They do have a very tough schedule.
Well, they do, but they did last year as well, right?
Okay.
And he got his, and I think Andy Dalton is only going to be that much better in his second campaign. I think you put Julio in there. For me, in a point per reception league, which I think is becoming the norm in fantasy football, I'll find a place for Wes Welker in my top 5, and I think Brandon Marshall has a huge reunion with Jay Cutler in Chicago. Looking back to their days in Denver, he was a 100 reception guy every year practically that he played with Cutler.
Cutler and him love each other. If he can find the end zone, which he had a little hard time to do, of doing in Miami, he'll be a fantasy stud. Your bottom 5, you already mentioned Marshall. Who are those couple of guys that could vault into that top 5 value?
I think you look at Victor Cruz, and I love him. He's had the extra time to develop more chemistry with Eli Manning, with Akeem Nicks being sidelined. Certainly, there are a lot of the usual suspects. You look at Andre Johnson. He could be a top 5 guy. Fitzgerald could be a top 5 guy. Either one of those Green Bay receivers could be a top 5 guy. I really think one of the sneaky guys, though, coming from the outside is Antonio Brown in Pittsburgh. I think he cements himself as the #1 option in Pittsburgh this year. Wallace is the deep threat. Antonio Brown's the guy you want to own.
Well, Antonio Brown, if you believe in any of the OTAs or the offseason work, he got his new deal done, but only thing he has to do is catch touchdowns. He had 1,100 yards last year, which is plenty for a stud receiver. He goes from 2 touchdowns to even 7 or 8. There's your top 15 guy.
Oh, we saw the explosiveness this preseason on a quick catch and run, made guys miss, body control, great balance. He's going to bring it all to the table. Those touchdowns will rise.
He can go as late as the 8th round. He's going in the 5th with people that know what they're doing, but anytime you're getting a top 15 guy in the 5th round.
I tell you what, I wouldn't have a problem pulling the trigger on him in the 4th round, depending on how the wide receiver run goes. That's how good I think he can be this year.
Let's talk wide receivers really quick. We mentioned Calvin Johnson. If you don't get Calvin Johnson, you're most likely going running back. And because we talked about the depth at quarterback, you go running back. There are so many guys. Let's look at that second 10 that people are looking at, and let's pick out some studs that people should be plucking when that 3rd round and even the early 4th round comes along.
Well, again, you look at this list here. Marcus Colston is a guy. He's the #1 target as far as a wide receiver goes in that prolific New Orleans offense. And Demaryius Thomas is on that list. I think Eric Decker is the guy to own because Thomas is the deep threat, and Peyton Manning, that's the one thing he hasn't shown. He's really locked into Eric Decker. You want a guy coming up from the outside? How about right here in Jacksonville? You might have to overdraft him, but Justin Blackmon has looked every bit the legitimate #1 wide receiver as they drafted him to be.
Over/under on Justin Blackmon catches at 67.
So that's a good number because I was going to say right around 70. So I'll put it over, but not by a whole lot.
67 catches, that'll still get you probably top 25 value if you can get in the end zone a little bit. All right, we talked about the depth of the position. We know most people are going PPR, which makes the wide receivers valuable. You cannot sleep on them. One guy I want to bring up, and you tell me if this is fair assessment, Percy Harvin. Florida guy. We know that he had a pretty good year last year. His rushing yards, he's on pace to get 300 rushing yards and a touchdown or 2. Can that bump him? I think people are looking at Percy, and I love Percy. You can't not love his athleticism and what he can do with the ball in his hands, but I think people are looking at his numbers from last year, and they're forgetting that
when Adrian Peterson went down, I think Percy was used even more as a rusher. I don't know if that necessarily he will get those same kind of touches. And I think Jerome Simpson, ultimately, when he comes back from his suspension, gives them a viable guy on the other side. I think he'll cut into his numbers as well. Love him as a number 2. If you're forced to take him as a number 1, I hope you're strong at running back.
I did have to do that recently, but I am pretty good at running back. All right. Mike Dempsey and I, all season long, throwing down head-to-head style. We got John Luca, a divorce attorney, focused on men's rights. He's at 358-8778, 358-8778. Call him. We got some throwdown here. We're going to agree on some of these. We're going to keep track online, and we're going to see who comes out at the end of the season. Roddy White, Julio Jones, both Atlanta receivers. Which side do you line?
Give me Julio. I think even Roddy White knows his numbers are coming down to earth a little.
And I will agree with you. I'll go Julio there. Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson.
Jordy, and for the reason that I think Jennings, coming off a concussion in the preseason, is a little bit disconcerting to me, and I think Jordy develops even more rapport with Aaron Rodgers.
15 touchdowns last year. Even if that comes down to 12, he has an unbelievable chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. I'll take Jordy Nelson. Hakeem Nicks, Victor Cruz, a lot of times coming off the board, one right after the other.
Right. I think these are the closest ones. I'd probably go Cruz, but it's personal preference. And really the key, I think, with all these matchups, be the guy who gets the second one of these teammates. They're all going to be prolific, but if you can get the second one, you'll typically get the better value.
We can't agree on everything. I'll go Nicks. So, you know, we'll agree on the first two. Nicks and Cruz right there. I love Cruz as well. Second quarter over. It's halftime. Take a breath, but we got plenty more action. We got your running backs, we got your tight ends, we got your draft strategy. Also, we'll preview the Wednesday night game, the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants. You're watching YourJax Fantasy Football.